altitude. Please put your body, mind, and soul in the upright position. We hope you enjoy the ride.
Welcome to WAYSPACE. This is it. Here we are. Let's be here. Now. Okay, so here we fucking are. How are you doing today? How are you doing tonight? How are you doing this morning, whenever you're listening to this? I hope you're doing well. I hope that if you are having to learn the same lesson over and over again, that it's getting easier and lighter each time. I'm still trying to decide if, as I learn the same lesson over and over again, spiritually speaking, or anyway, really, that it's getting lighter and easier. And each time I remember how this shit is, I'm, I guess, getting better or getting whatever it is I'm supposed to get. I mean, last week I talked about all the work and I went through it all and had my understanding about things, and that was great. And then I go another week and I fall into unconsciousness, so to speak, you know? I was thinking earlier, and as I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to title the podcast and talk about today, there was something I came across while basically consuming the content of one of my many, at this point, sort of spiritual teachers whose content I pull from online. I feel like, as in a sort of self-taught spiritual society that we have as far as the internet goes and the way that I'm consuming content, it's like my spiritual teachings are part of consuming social media content, which I gotta say, part of it feels kind of icky. You know, it's like I look at something and I'm like, ugh, am I gonna consume this like I consume other shit, but I'm also gonna try to claim in my head that I'm doing it because it's for spiritual reasons? I guess I am. And it's sort of it's a weird situation, because there's also there's learning and study and practice by reading books that came out 50 years ago or 100 years ago or longer, thousands of years ago, whatever. And I do that, but I think it's also relevant to understand that part of spiritual practice, learning, teaching is going to exist on the internet within the, Web 2 social media space as it is right now. And I think it's worth recognizing that there's an aspect of that is going to be valuable, because the people that are making content for teaching purposes to help as basically pointers for people, that if they're making it within this internet space and on social media and everything, then they recognize a lot of the perils that come with social media and existing online nowadays, which there are. And I think, me personally, like, clearly I'm making a podcast about this, and not to say that I'm trying to teach or something, but I am making content about spirituality where, I mean, I know just for myself, I learn from listening back to these podcast episodes. And in some ways, I guess I'm learning because it's sort of like journal entries, but I'm also learning because I go over things that I forget or that I have less access to. And so I recognize, that that part of being in this Web 2 space necessarily, if you want to kind of be engaged in spiritual practice, having teachers that understand, appreciate, and actually operate within this space is helpful and important, unless you're trying to leave the world. But I know for myself, like I've talked about this before, renunciation is not really my path. I can tell. And I think for a lot of us, if you're listening to this, renunciation and leaving the world is not really any of our paths. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here. But if that is your path, then honestly, good luck to you. And sounds sick. It sounds dope. Sounds like you're definitely going to reach some great states of awakening, so to speak. But for those of us that are trying to awaken here within our circumstances and accepting and honoring the incarnation that we have in the way that we can, as I'm definitely trying to do, there are some things to me that come to mind, which is this process of waking up, going back to sleep, waking up, going back to sleep, and learning the same lesson in different ways over and over and over again until we learn it for good and we internalize it deep, deep, deep within our unconscious, and then we get it. We get it. And so anyway, that brings to mind, like I was saying, from teachers that I've come across online, and one in particular who has a podcast, Jason Louv, he talked about, I can't remember if it was on his Ultra Culture podcast or in some kind of video or talking to one of his students or something, but he talked about how once you start this work in Western magic, it's called the Great Work. Once you start whatever this work is of awakening, once you turn around, you're walking, trying to do whatever you're trying to do in your life and just kind of servant to the karma, and your mind is freaking out and you're kind of reactive to everything and you're not in control of anything, basically. Or, we think that we're only in control of what's literally right in front of us and we don't have a connection to anything higher or more expansive, or a connection to the universe, or however we want to put it. That at that point, once you turn around from that and you say, okay, I'm going to start looking within and I'm going to start the process of awakening, you then make you sort of sign a deal with yourself. I know I did, where now I can't really go back on my word, on my promise, which was that now I'm going to start living with the understanding that my thoughts create reality, that I am the God that I pray to or have prayed to or haven't believed in or have believed in or whatever, and that I have greater autonomy than I thought possible before. And once I once I start operating within that understanding and that mindset, that awareness, that spiritual practice, what have you, however you want to put it, that I can't blame the things that I used to blame. I can't, like I did in my morning pages today, like I can't just, I can do it, but there's no excuse for blaming circumstances or saying that I don't have control over something, or that that's just the way it is, or that I'm just really depressed. And it's not to say that I'm wrong in any of that, but that is never going to be able to be my entire story ever again. Because now I'm living with this understanding. I'm doing the work of constructing my reality as I see fit. And so if I'm feeling really depressed and really off and feeling like all this shit is going to shit and I'm not going to be able to be there for the people in my life, and I'm screwing up monetarily or with my career, or I'm doomed to failure, or whatever it might be, all of those narratives, I can't pretend anymore like those are just like narratives that are controlling me. I have to accept going forward that ultimately these narratives are self-created and they're also self-maintained. And every time I talk about how depressed I am, or talk about how I'm really off, or how I talk about how I'm avoiding the world, I'm continuously maintaining the narrative. And I got to take responsibility for that. I can't shirk with the responsibility anymore. So that's what I've been thinking about today, leading up to sort of talking about what I'm going to talk about on the podcast, is remembering what I heard about that, and how once you start this path, you don't have the luxury of shirking responsibility and turning everything off and going to sleep again. Because ultimately you can do that, but you're going to wake up again because you've woken up before. And so and when I say woken up, I don't mean to make it sound like it's binary. It's more of an uncovering process, a shedding skin process. But that being said, every time I turn around and try to like hide from the light and hide from the path that's laid out for me, that I've laid out for myself, every time I turn around, I'm going to like, I'll take as much time as I can inside of my little huddling bubble of hiding from the light and hiding from this awakening process and pretending like I wasn't conscious and conscious of my decisions and conscious of what I wanted and conscious of creating what I wanted to transpire in my life and selecting the reality that I desire. I'm gonna go back the other way, and I'm gonna wake up again and be like, shit, I went for a while that time thinking that I didn't have control over what was going on with me. And not to say that I'm, totally asleep to that when I'm feeling depressed. It's just more like at a subconscious level, I'm allowing my unconscious drives and processes to really take over. And I don't want to discount that a lot of things that are swirling around in my unconscious aren't really powerful and difficult to change. But there's a difference between me saying that they're difficult to change and me actively doing practices that allow me to change and adjust my reality versus not even asking the question and just avoiding the question every time it comes up in my head and every time it comes up in my realizations and my memories of the fact that I've done this before and I can do it again. And actually, not even I can do it again, I'm going to do it again. So what am I doing acting like I'm unconscious with all of this? I just don't, there's not a lot of room for excuses anymore. And again, I don't mean that to sound like I need to like blame myself for being depressed. But at the same time, it's like, dude, like, what went into these processes. You have enough awareness now to understand how this stuff goes. And I was watching a video today. I forget the guy's name, but he's just, another spiritual teacher online. There's so many people teaching all different forms of spirituality, whether they use the word spirituality or not. But he had a great diagram of how it goes from thought then to a belief or a weak belief in the thought that comes up. And then it goes toward you just believe it just enough that you start to look for confirmation for that belief. And then after that, once you start to find confirmation, it then turns into a conviction. And I realized that's the process that happened, with as far as me sort of huddling and turning away from the light of my path and if in the last couple of days or whatever. And it just has to do with, I got caught up in thoughts that would come up and arise, and they're so tasty and so grabby. And then I start to believe it, not believing it where I'm like, oh, I don't recognize that they're just thoughts, but I start to believe it just enough to start to look for confirmation. And once you start looking for confirmation, you'll be able to come up with confirmation, because you can look for confirmation for basically anything that comes up in your head. And then it starts to become a conviction. And then I start to engage in habits that are built on the conviction. And so even if I think in my head that I am capable and worthy of engaging in the world and talking to my loved ones and friends and being around other people, or engaging in my creativity, or engaging in my spirituality, like meditation or anything, that if I have operated on the conviction that that is not true, that I'm not worthy, then I start to operate in ways like it's really difficult for me to get out of bed in the morning. And even though I experience a block that is keeping me from getting up, like this morning or pretty much every morning, and I want to keep crawling back into bed, that I succumb to that because I'm starting to have faith in a conviction that it's not worth me getting up out of bed. And even if I can say that, well, it's just a thought, it's now seeped under the surface level of my conscious mind. And so it's now going to take some work to dig things out and dig up what I've allowed to seep into my subconscious and get it out of there. So that's kind of in terms of where I'm at with my spiritual practice and thinking about what I'm doing. That's kind of where I'm at with it, is that I'm recognizing what's been going on and what I've allowed to transpire within my consciousness. And it's not comfortable. It's not fun. I've I've just been sort of not even going through the motions. I've been sort of, what is it, like it's like retrograding or whatever, where you're sort of going backwards. It feels like I've been taking steps backwards. I'm, thinking more about like, I just want to create my safe situations that make me feel safe from any discomfort. And like, yo, that's the shit that I'm gonna not even just have to wake up from. I'm going to wake up from it. So every time I try to act like I'm asleep and I don't know what's going on and why do I feel so shitty? It's like, I know why I feel shitty. And it's not like I know why because of this specific circumstance and this specific circumstance. Sure, there's content there. There's always going to be content. There's always going to be reasons why I'm upset. There's always going to be reasons why I'm insecure. There are always going to be reasons why I'm nervous. It might be something in my past. It might be something that I'm experiencing now that is connected to my past. It could be a whole host of things. There's plenty of life content for me to pull from to confirm why I should feel shitty about myself or concerned about myself or insecure or hopeless or whatever. And the question is, what is my overarching narrative around this content? Is the content a source for me to feel optimistic about my future? Not even just optimistic, but to see it as stepping stones for the life and reality that I want to occupy and select for myself? Or actually not, it's not an or. It's just, that's it. I can use the content however I want to use the content. I can use the content of like that I had, almost $40,000 in savings a few years, probably, like up until 3 years ago or so. And I spent it all around 3 years ago. Within about a year and a half, 2 years, I spent all my savings. And the question of what that experience was, and I talked about this in an earlier episode, it's like, what is that fuel as far as my narrative? Is that experience why I'm going to be able to have the life and reality that I want? Or is it going to be why I don't get to have the life and reality I want? What is that content in my past proof of? And it's anything. It could be anything. It's anything that I want it to be proof of. So every time that story or that thing comes up in me, I can say that was an extremely valuable lesson, and it's why I'm going to be super successful in what I want to do going forward, because I learned so much from that process and it was really important. Or am I going to think of it as, wow, that really set me on a trajectory that I'm bound to just like fail at this stuff. Like either way, if I just put enough faith and heart and emotion into it, I can make it true for myself either way. And so that's what I mean by like, that is what I'm conscious of. I'm conscious of my power in that respect. And now that I'm conscious of that power, I can't make the excuse anymore. I can't skip over that part. I can't skip to saying, well, it's the things that have happened to me. Like I've tried to like dig myself out of these holes, but I'm bound to be stuck here. And I'm bound to be stuck in a place where I just don't feel good about myself, or et cetera, et cetera. And I can pretend like I'm skipping over the part where I know that I have ultimate autonomy and control over this, but it's at a certain point I'm gonna come across something that reminds me again and again and again to learn this lesson that I do have the control and autonomy that I think that I can pretend that I don't have. And I can't make that statement about everybody. Not because I don't think it's true of everybody, but because I think we're all at different stages of understanding this and coming to terms with it and recognizing it is true for ourselves. But I know for myself, I'm embarking on this path. I've made my initiative sort of commitments to this in a whole host of ways. And yeah, it's time for me to start letting go of, I've already been doing it, but it's time for me to really like recognize that this lesson is something I'm going to keep learning until I really get it into my head. And when I say into my head, I mean into the iceberg, into my unconscious, into my subconscious, because that's the trajectory that is overarching this entire process. And so every time I fall asleep like this, or, I was actually literally falling asleep. Like every time I keep trying to go back to sleep, I mean, my morning routine right now is pretty much stalling my morning practices and just getting up, going to the bathroom, getting a drink of water, and crawling back into bed for a few hours every morning. Like that morning routine is necessarily a temporary thing, and it is metaphorical, analogous, however you want to put it, for the way that I'm operating. Is I keep trying to go back to sleep. I keep trying to crawl back into bed, literally and metaphorically, spiritually. And the trick is, and we all know this, like if you go to sleep, you're gonna wake up. Like that's how it goes. I mean, as long as you're not leaving your body and dying in your sleep or something like that. Like we know that, for me at least, as I go back to sleep in the morning when I'm not wanting to get out of bed yet, or just wanting to crawl back into bed, I'm gonna wake up again. And it might be nice to sleep for an extra 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever. But I'm going to wake up again, and I'm going to face the beautiful day that's ready for me. It's beautiful outside right now. It's September in the Washington, D.C. area. It's not as swampy now. It's beautiful. The day is beautiful, and it's ready for me to select how I want my day, aka life, aka spiritual path, to transpire. Do I want to keep learning these same lessons and having to keep going back to sleep and waking up and going back to sleep and waking up? Or do I want to select the reality I'm going to have and start meditating on that, contemplating that, and getting my bow and arrow like set to shoot out and nail the target? Because that's what the opportunity that is in front of me. And like, am I going to spend any more time continuing to go back to sleep with this? I think, as I'm thinking about this, I think what it partially means is it's really up to me to figure out what practices are going to keep me on target and aimed where I want to be aimed at consistently. And meditation is wonderful, but clearly it requires a bit more than that. Because I'm in this for the long haul. I'm in this for the whole thing. I'm in this for enlightenment and everything in between. I'm in this for whatever it is that I'm here for and here to learn, which includes everything I've been talking about on this episode. So, yeah. Yeah. So let's see. What are these questions that I have here for myself? I need to get a sip of water. 1 second. You should get a sip of water too. So, as I'm sort of hydrating and getting a sense of things, I can feel there's a lot of frustration in my voice and in my being right now. And it makes sense. It's difficult. I'm the boat that I'm in, the boat on the cover art, my space boat here that I'm using to traverse all the spiritual planes and experiences, and AKA just my psychology, is all over the place, rocking back and forth, flipping over, coming back up, flipping over again, coming back up, flipping over again. And I keep having to learn how to keep myself balanced on this whole thing. And it's tough, but yeah, I think I'm going to be listening to this podcast at some point in the future, and I'll be like, shit, yeah, learning the same lesson in different ways, and that's okay. And yeah. So I think something I'm going to think about going forward, and if this is beneficial to you, awesome. If not, bear with me as I think about this, is what are my tools and resources that are going to really help me in moments like this? Ultimately, I think in exposing myself to content that is really helpful for me spiritually is important. I think recording this podcast is really important. I do think doing my morning pages is hugely important. I think doing my meditation is hugely important. And I think things like getting exercise is hugely important. But that being said, with that list, I'm also going to be thinking about, and who knows, maybe this will be my homework or something between now and next episode, or just, things to think about. But what are new things that are going to help me remember this fact of my path at this point? It's just the way it is now. And it's daunting, but it's better. And it's what I've wanted my whole life. And it's not time for me to just shirk the responsibility that I really want over my life and existence. I want to have the power over my life that I've longed for. And this spiritual work is that for me. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about. I think this is going to be a shorter episode this week. Thank you so much for being with me. And with wherever you are at with your life, your path, your spirituality, your career goals, your motivation, your mental health, whatever it might be, I wish you luck. But more than that, I wish you the conscious awareness to do what you really want to do for yourself, to select what you really want for yourself, and to embody that, to see that transpire in your life right before your eyes, even if we might have to remind ourselves sometimes about how that works. All right. Well, if you want to support me, which if you're listening to this, you probably already support me like this, but just to remind people, and it's kind of fun to announce some things at the end, you can find me on Patreon. It's patreon.com/JackInTheWay. And thank you so much for listening to this podcast. And I love you. Hope you have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. See you soon. Here's to remembering who we are. Peace.